Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an educator from Australia who's made a home in India, Lina Ashar. Lina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh.
Lina is the co-founder of Korroboree, which is an online school focusing on self-discovery and self-mastery. She's the founder emeritus of Kangaroo Kids and Billabong High International Schools, and she's a happiness advocate. So, let's talk about Korroboree Online School, as well as the Kangaroo Kids and Billabong High International Schools. Tell me a little bit about your motivation to start this venture.
So I'm actually, I think, an avid researcher in the areas of neuroscience and behavioral science, and I study people from Hitler to serial killers to people who've been very, very successful, and I kind of am looking for the common patterns and threads in their upbringing, in their experiences, and so what can make one person this and what can make one person this. And then, looking to see whether we can infuse all the good stuff in the way we parent and we educate our kids. So I think basically that's who I am. I'm in terms of being an happiness advocate. I think the end all and beginning of everything that we do is this search for this elusive state. So why not bring it into an education system from the beginning, right? So that was Kangaroo Kids, the yearning for joyful learning, and then Billabong High, that even high school should be fun. And then Korroboree, which is a little bit beyond that because it is still looking at happiness and peace, but it's also you're looking at the evolving state of human consciousness and what of that should we infuse into the learning. And interestingly, Korroboree actually means a sacred gathering, the Aboriginal language, and so looking to the indigenous intelligence that people have had and brought to the world, and we've kind of gone very left brain logical, and we've kind of lost some of that. So to bring that back into a learning system.
Very, very interesting. So you relocated from Australia to India. What was the thought of what were you bringing back to India, and what were you between the Aboriginal thoughts that you spoke about and the traditional Indian thoughts? Where was the synergy and the mix and match that you were able to do to bring value to children?
So, like Steve Jobs says, you can only connect the dots looking backwards, right? So to be honest, I was sent here to get away from an Australian boyfriend that had proposed to me, and my parents didn't want me to marry. They saw a lot of Indian values in me. And when I say Indian values, I'm talking about perhaps more historically the values that we've had as the human race, not the kind of ones that we've imbibed from the West and moved along. So the beauty of this is that, the West has made lots of leaps and bounds in terms of innovation today and looking at abundance rather than scarcity. So how can you bring some of that into an existing educational system and transform it, to say. So yeah, so I don't think I've ever had an absolute plan that, 5 years from today, this is exactly where I'm going to be. But I kind of have a sense of 5 years from today, who do I want to be? And then what do I need to kind of do in order to get there? And that's the same sort of question we ask kids, right? If we give kids back agency and autonomy and we ask them, who do they want to be and what problem do they want to solve in the world, then we don't have to kind of force them to learn. We don't have to kind of force them to stay on task and on goals. It just happens automatically.
So for my viewers and listeners, Lina, can you share one or two examples of where these differences are and how are these being received by the children or the kids?
So we look at universal human values, right? So in India, I feel somewhere sometimes we get lost in the ritual rather than what is the actual human value we're trying to imbibe here. So we'll teach kids to touch their grandparents' feet without actually giving them the history and the reason behind it. If we have a learning system, I think the first thing we value is kids asking questions rather than being given answers. And that's historically how our gurukuls worked, right? There was personalized learning. The guru actually came from the student's point of interest. It wasn't a standardized learning format. So if we can take some of the things that the West has realized in terms of neuroscience and some of the advances that they've made there, and obviously they do a lot of research in behavioral science, and we can bring it to the the history of who we were as humans, or who we Indians were, then I think that's a beautiful fusion to be created there. So give you an example, if we're teaching empathy to kids, and we see what's happening today, right, with Russia and Ukraine. It's as you said, it's the narrative we tell ourselves, and they're two very strong narratives that are completely at opposing sides. But what if we were to teach kids, that history books, for example, in classrooms are written by almost by the politicians who influence what's being written. And what if, for example, you were to rewrite this chapter in the history book on partition from a Muslim child's point of view? How would that shift some of the narrative? And it's only, I guess it's only if children start understanding that the narratives that are being told, firstly, are very influenced by the external politics and other people's vested interests. And if kids start critically thinking through some of the narratives, I think we can bring sort of people together and more peace in the world.
Okay. So, when I was reading about you, Korroboree is an online school. How was this online school taken or accepted before the pandemic? Because post the pandemic, everything went online. So what was it that you were doing differently?
So my Korroboree is not a response to the pandemic. I sold my Kangaroo Kids and Billabong High 5 years ago. And that's largely because I did two things. In that 1 year, I went to Anthony Robbins' self-mastery course called Date with Destiny. And I went to John D. Martini's course as well. But I also went to Peter Diamandis's Abundance 360. And that started giving me thoughts about, if I were to change the approach to how I'm doing things, could I actually have a larger impact than what I'm doing through brick and mortar style schooling? So when I sold out, obviously you go through your non-compete and stuff. And then I'd already started putting the framework together of what I wanted to do here. Firstly, by interviewing 100 thought leaders like Seth Godin and people like that, as to where's the future of the world, then a neuroscientist to what do we know about the brain that means we should change the way we're approaching learning and teaching, and behavioral scientists, how could kids be more self-motivated, have more self-leadership in their whole designing of what they're learning and why they're learning and where they're going. So I had already started the framework and the groundwork for Korroboree. Obviously, I couldn't execute it because of my non-compete, but all the work had already started. In fact, we're ready to launch now on May the 3rd. So the thing is that what we've realized through the pandemic, or what parents should have realized, is one is we can actually do schooling academically at a higher level, accelerated learning in half the time it takes in a school day. Even things like breakout rooms, like collaboration is much easier when you have Zoom than when you're trying to rearrange physical classrooms. The second thing is you're saving 2+ hours of a child's travel time, right? Plus, there's no homework in our online school. So suddenly now kids have got their childhood back. So what it allows for, where the future is going is, you need some amount of generalization. So you need some basic understanding of math, English, science, but at a more, level of where kids are asking pertinent questions and getting the answers themselves. And then you actually need a specialized form of learning, what we call like a personal monopoly, where your interest, your skill set and everything comes together to create something that only you uniquely can do in the world.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. And
so this allows for that.
I understand. And you also speak about the focus on self-discovery and self-mastery. Could you help me understand this with some examples?
So, for example, we know that every thought leads to a certain emotion, which leads to a certain action, which leads to the destiny and outcome of our lives. So a simple example, that's a story that's often told, which you would have heard, is the two salesmen who go to Africa to look at the opportunity of setting up a shoe factory. One writing back saying, no opportunity, nobody wears shoes. And the other one saying, fabulous opportunity, nobody wears shoes, right? Or the one where, you've got twins and it's a true story of an alcoholic father. One turns out to be successful. The other one is, an alcoholic. And when asked by a reporter, how come? How did you turn out to be this way? They say, look at my father. How could I be anything else? So we all know that our inner narrative and the way that inner narrative works, it expresses our outer reality in some way, So not in some way, in kind of always. So if I can get kids to understand why they're doing everything. So, I was sitting with an instructional designer yesterday, and, in the movement activities, she's doing dance. And I said, before you even do the activity of dance, kids have to understand what dance does to their brains. What chemicals does it release? Why do we enjoy movement? Why should we move? What does it do to our brains, to our bodies, to everything else? In the same way, we teach kids, when you have a thought, this thought or this thought, how does it affect your body differently? And that kids start understanding that 85% of human diseases are caused in the mind, not in the body. And so then when they start understanding that, they understand how the brain and the body works, and the intuitive part of intelligence, they suddenly look at everything very differently. Because their brain actually understands why it's being asked to do something in the first place.
Very interesting. So let me move on, Lina, and ask you a few more generic or general questions on education in India. My first question is that, while there are a lot of changes being made across the whole country in the way the education has to be delivered to children, I often wonder that in spite of the incredible pressure cooker system that our children go through, India seems to be producing a lot of bright kids who seem to be doing very, very well outside India. What is it that we are doing right? I mean, everyone I speak to always say that there's a lot of it that is wrong. From an educator's perspective,
one is, if you look at the kids who are doing really, really well, a lot of them go to cross borders for an international education as well. So it's the rigor of what we do with the creativity of what is then offered to them. The second thing is, I don't think anyone's looking at the other side of the pressure cooker, which is that we have a lot of kids who are committing suicide, who are going into depths of depression because their brains are overworked, overwhelmed, and they're escaping into digital formats of, whether it's television or games or this or that. So I think one is to look at the whole, both sides of the coin. The second is to look at the fact that we really have a huge population. Right. And one is we're spread all across the world. And we do specifically well if we're in a Western country, because we've got the orientation or the importance of education of that we've, that's been ingrained in us, with the creativity of a Western education, and not forgetting everything, just our population is so big. So if you look at the amount of gold and silver medals we win in sports compared to what, like, for example, Australia wins, it gives you some, it has to be, when you say so many Indians doing well, it has to be counted as a ratio.
I understand. And there's also a lot of use of technology now in education. And, I've spoken to many people who are now talking about bringing, or who are working actively on taking STEM to girls' education all across the country. What is your perspective on how is technology changing or is likely to change education?
So drastically, one is, you would know that edtechs are doing really well. I think one of the things they're doing incorrectly is they're taking a conventional classroom and turning it digital. I think we have to use the power of the human brain, which is now a collective brain. And how do we take that and harness that so that our children are accelerated in their understanding. They're not starting at sort of ground zero, going step 1, step 2, step 3. So one is, yes, technology, but technology is a tool, and it shouldn't become it can't be seen as the medium. It's just a tool, and you can use technology in powerful ways. As I said, you can use it to meditate. You can use it to harness the collective brain that we have. You can use it for all those things, but it cannot be that we use technology just as a medium of taking a conventional classroom and taking it online.
Okay. My next question to Lina is that government has always had a lot of control on education in our country. I'd love to get your perspective on what can be changed and what should continue.
So government will continue to have an interest in education as long as parents keep on complaining, right? And parents complain because of XYZ things that they experience. The scarcity, firstly, that it exists. And then, the notion that education should be a socialist sort of thing. If you look at it on the other side, there are entrepreneurs who have always taken it away from government. You have every single private chain of schools owning a trust and a company. And sort of bypassing the government in some sense, right? And the laws. One of the reasons why I sold, because I grew up in Australia, I like black and white. I don't like all these shades of gray that I have to operate within. But when we start using technology, it's going to be taken away from the government anyway. You've got people like a guy called Shira Chef, who's building the University of the People, a university for millions of kids. He's backed, he's got the support of Stanford and Harvard and all of that. So education is going to become demonetized. It's going to become decentralized, and it's it's going to be completely digitized. So a lot will be taken away from government, and that's a good thing, because now quality players will sort of survive, and not only survive, they'll kind of thrive, because parents want. Technology allows us to give you the best at the least possible price, because we don't have now constraints of infrastructure and the cost of infrastructure and all of that. So it allows us to take away a lot of the costs that exist, and it allows parents now to to sort of scour and get the best that they and personalize, right? Because every parent wants something different. But personalized to the interest of the parent at the best possible price. And then I think governments won't have that much to say. At the moment, governments are talking about EdTech because of one of the EdTech unicorns that's, getting parents disgruntled about certain stuff. Otherwise, the parents got the government about certain stuff. Otherwise, the government's got no role to play, actually, in education.
Okay. And I've got time for one more question. So I'm going to continue with what your last comment was on parents. When I was growing up, parents had a different expectation from us, which was, certain careers that you could go to, et cetera, et cetera. You work with a lot of young parents. What is your perspective of their understanding on expectations from education and expectations from children?
So they have expectations, but I don't serve those expectations. I serve what's in the best interest of the child. So when I started Kangaroo Kids in 1993, every school was a training ground for entrance into a high school, right? So kids were being actually parrot taught certain things. Who's Mahatma Gandhi? What's moving air called? Blah, blah, blah. At the moment, parents are kind of understanding that the world has changed, that the future of work is very, very different. That if your kid is one of the generalized learners of a curriculum, there's a very limited scope for him in the world, that everything is changing at a very, very exponential sort of rate, that doctors, surgeries, lawyers, everything's going to become a digital version. So parents are kind of sensing that, that we need a shift to a kind of a right brain education, like a heart-based education. It's one that involves empathy, the teaching of empathy, compassion, collaboration, etc. They're not completely sure. So then, through social media, that's the sort of power of social media, because now I have the power to kind of influence and tell a narrative that actually shows parents where the world is going and why what they need for their kids today is so different.
Very interesting. Lina, on that note, thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about Korroboree and all the other great work that you're doing for children as they go out their path of self-discovery and self-mastery. Thank you for also talking to me about your perspectives on education in India. Thank you again and good luck.
Thank you, Ashutosh.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.